Let me tell you what happened the night my parents handed my future to someone else, and smiled while doing it. My name is Renee. I am 31 years old. I am a financial strategist. For 6 years, I quietly helped manage my family's investment portfolio because I loved my parents and I believed loyalty meant something. That Tuesday evening, my father called a family dinner. I assumed it was to celebrate my promotion. I had just been named senior partner at my firm, the biggest moment of my career. I drove 40 minutes across town, brought wine, and walked in smiling. My father stood at the head of the table. He cleared his throat the way he does before difficult news. Then he said it, slowly, clearly, like he had rehearsed it. He and my mother had decided to transfer the lake house and the full investment portfolio to my younger sister, Jade. She needs it more right now, he said. The wine glass in my hand felt very heavy. I set it down before I dropped it. Jade beamed from across the table. My mother looked at me with soft eyes, bracing for tears. I didn't cry. I sat very still, and something inside me changed permanently. Nobody spoke for what felt like 3 full minutes. The food sat untouched. My father stared at the table. My mother looked at me. Jade looked at her phone. Then my mother reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're strong, Renee," she said softly. "You'll be fine on your own. You always land on your feet." That sentence, I have heard some version of it my entire life. It is what my family says when they choose Jade and need me to feel acceptable about it. I am 2 years older than Jade. Our whole lives, she was the dreamer, creative, emotional, full of big plans. I was the responsible one, the stable one, the one who graduated without debt, built a career, and helped my parents with their taxes every spring. I thought being dependable was a virtue. I thought it earned trust. What it apparently earned was the assumption that I needed nothing. Jade has launched 2 businesses. My parents covered both failures quietly. I paid my own college tuition. I built my career without a single safety net. And somehow, that independence became the reason they gave the portfolio to her instead. Because I didn't need it. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, just the road and something cold and purposeful forming inside me. The next morning, I drove back to my parents' house. I owed them the chance to explain themselves. I sat across from my father at the kitchen table and spoke calmly. I reminded him that I had restructured the portfolio's tax strategy 3 years ago. That restructuring doubled its value. $68,000 became over $140,000. Not by luck, but because I spent 4 weekends analyzing risk brackets and rebalancing the asset mix myself. My father nodded while I spoke. Then he said, "And that's exactly why you don't need it, Renee. You have that skill. You can build your own." I stared at him. He had just told me that my competence was the reason I deserved nothing, that my work justified my exclusion. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam anything. I thanked him, stood up, and walked out. But something had permanently shifted. A decision had been made inside me that I had not yet put into words, but I could already feel its shape. I was done fixing things for free. Jade came to my apartment the next evening. She brought flowers, which felt like a strange choice. She sat on my couch and apologized for how things happened. But she did not refuse the gift. She said, "They just really believe in me, Renee. I didn't ask them for this." I gave her a glass of water and said nothing. She told me her plan. She was going to turn the lake house into a boutique event space. Weddings, corporate retreats, weekend gatherings for wealthy clients. She showed me a mood board on her phone. Soft lighting, linen tablecloths, little candles in glass jars. It was genuinely beautiful. It was also built entirely on money I had helped grow, on property I had co-managed for years, using a vision assembled in 2 weeks. "We'll all benefit," she said warmly. "You could even consult for me. We'd be a team." I smiled and told her it sounded lovely. I did not tell her what I was already noticing. No budget breakdown. No vendor contracts. No revenue model. No contingency plan. I had seen this pattern in 3 clients before. I knew exactly what the early stage of this kind of collapse looked like. So I smiled and I started watching. Looking back, the pattern was always there. I had simply refused to name it. When Jade was 12, she wanted ballet lessons. My parents paid without hesitation. I wanted guitar lessons at the same age. I saved up and bought a second-hand guitar myself. When Jade was 19, she wanted to study abroad in Florence. My parents covered the flights, housing, and spending money. I attended the state university nearby because it was the financially responsible choice, one I made entirely alone. When Jade was 24, she launched a handmade jewelry business. It failed in 8 months. My parents absorbed the loss without discussion. When Jade was 26, she launched an online styling service. 11 months. Same ending. Same quiet cover-up. Nobody ever sat her down with a budget and a deadline. Because she was the dreamer. Dreamers were allowed to fail beautifully. I was not a dreamer. I was the planner. The one who showed her work and never asked for applause. For most of my life, I wore that identity like a badge. I thought it made me admirable. What I understand now is that my family had simply learned I would handle whatever they would not. I was not the strong one. I was the convenient one. 6 months after the transfer, Jade opened the boutique with a launch party that was, I will admit, genuinely stunning. The lake house looked like a magazine spread. Fairy lights strung from the dock posts. Long wooden tables, laid with wildflowers. A live acoustic duo playing near the water. Over 80 guests, including local event planners, she had somehow convinced to attend. My parents were glowing. My father kept clapping Jade on the shoulder. I stood near the dock and watched the vendors. I noticed things other people miss. It is what makes me good at my work. And what I noticed that evening were small cracks that no one else was searching for. The catering manager pulled Jade aside twice during the event. Their conversations were short and tight. The florist arrived 30 minutes late. A lighting technician stood near the road on his phone, visibly frustrated. After guests left, I overheard 2 vendors by the kitchen. One mentioned a deposit that hadn't cleared. The other said he hadn't heard from her assistant in 10 days. Jade floated past both of them without stopping. I recognized the signs immediately. The early cash flow gap where ambition outruns structure and the launch looks perfect while the foundation is already cracking. I kept folding the tablecloths and said nothing. 3 months after the launch, my mother called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She started with small talk, always a warning sign. Then she asked if I would be willing to look at Jade's books. Just temporarily, she said. You know how you are with numbers. I knew exactly what this was. The old pattern, Renee will fix it. Renee won't mind. I told her I was open to helping, but I had one condition. I would come in as a formal consultant with a signed agreement, a defined scope, and a consulting fee. My mother paused. That sounds very official for family. I said that was exactly why the agreement was necessary. 2 days later, Jade called. We met at a coffee shop and I had the 1-page agreement already printed. Basic scope, hourly rate, a clear end date. Jade looked at it for a long time before signing. I noticed the hesitation. She was used to receiving help with no terms attached. Help that arrived wrapped in love and asked for nothing. This was different. I was different. She signed it. I folded the paper into my bag and ordered my coffee. For the first time in our adult lives, I had drawn a firm boundary with my family. It held. The numbers were bad. Not slightly off. Structurally, foundationally bad in the way that tells you trouble started before the first invoice was ever sent. The renovation had cost 40% more than projected. Jade had hired a contractor without getting competing bids, then approved upgrades mid-project without adjusting the budget. Original estimate, $80,000. Actual cost, $112,000. The vendor contracts were vague. 2 contained penalty clauses Jade hadn't noticed when she signed. 1 florist agreement required 3 months cancellation notice or full fee forfeiture. A catering contract had already auto-renewed. Her revenue projections assumed 90% venue occupancy in the first 6 months. She was running at 31%. The investment portfolio had funded the renovation entirely. At the current burn rate, remaining funds would last approximately 4 more months. I built a complete recovery plan, cut 2 vendor contracts, renegotiate a third, adjust pricing on 2 event packages, pause non-essential marketing for 90 days while building a proper booking pipeline. It was fixable, genuinely fixable, but only if Jade was willing to follow a plan that did not feel exciting. I printed everything and drove to the lake house to present it. Jade listened to the full presentation without interrupting. I walked her through every number, the cash flow model, the vendor renegotiation strategy, the adjusted revenue projections. Then she sat back and said, "This feels really conservative." I told her it wasn't conservative. It was accurate. She thought cutting the marketing spend was wrong. She had a photographer booked for a campaign shoot the following week. She believed the visibility would drive bookings. I showed her the timeline. If she ran the shoot and bookings didn't increase within 60 days, she couldn't cover the November vendor payments. She looked at my spreadsheet and then looked at her phone. "I'll figure it out," she said. I called my parents that evening. I told them the plan had been presented and Jade had concerns about the approach. My mother said, "Let her be creative, Renee. She needs room to breathe." My father said he trusted Jade's instincts. I closed my laptop. "Then I can't help," I said calmly. Silence on the line. My parents were not used to hearing that from me. In 31 years, I had never walked away from a family problem mid-process. But I had a signed agreement. The plan was rejected. I was done. 90 days later, the calls started. First my mother. "Jade is having trouble with a few vendors." Then my father. "There's a billing dispute. She needs help mediating." Then Jade herself. "One of the caterers is threatening small claims court." By the time I had the full picture, 3 vendors had sent formal demand letters. The catering company was seeking $4,200. The florist was invoking her penalty clause, another $6,000. A lighting vendor had threatened to file a lien against the property. The boutique had not hosted a paying event in 6 weeks. My parents called me together on a video call. They looked exhausted. My father said they needed me to step in and help stabilize things. I told them I was willing to advise. I would review documents, answer questions, point toward solutions. I would not provide funding. I would not cover any vendor payments. My mother said, "But you could help, Renee. You have the money." I said, "I know, but this isn't my responsibility to fund." The silence that followed was different from every silence we had shared before. Not angry, stunned. They had forgotten that no was a word I knew. I found out about the loans by accident. I was on a call with Marcus, my family's financial advisor of 11 years, reviewing documents related to my grandmother's estate. He mentioned something offhand, assuming I already knew, about the co-signature my parents had recently completed. They had co-signed a business loan for Jade, $45,000, secured against the remaining investment portfolio. My future, what remained of it, was now collateral for a failing business. They had not told me, not one word. I ended the call politely and sat very still at my desk for a long time. This was no longer simply favoritism. I had accepted favoritism as a painful fact of my family's life. This was something different. This was recklessness with shared financial infrastructure. The portfolio had been a family asset, and even after the transfer, portions of its legal structure connected to trust mechanisms I had helped establish years ago. They had used those mechanisms without understanding them. I was not angry in the way people expect, hot and frantic. I was clear. The kind of clarity that arrives when you stop hoping something isn't true and accept that it is. I opened my laptop and began making a list. I met with Marcus independently. He had known me since I was 23, sitting in on my parents' planning sessions, taking notes. He respected what I had built, and he answered my questions honestly. I asked him to walk me through the full portfolio structure, not the balances, but the legal architecture, the trust instruments, the distribution clauses. And there it was. My grandmother had established a family trust in 2009. My parents assumed control after her passing. I had restructured the asset allocation inside the trust 4 years ago, which is why I understood its mechanics better than anyone else in the family. What my parents had forgotten, or perhaps never fully understood, was a clause my grandmother's attorney had insisted upon. In the event of liquidation or forced asset sale of trust-held properties, all proceeds must be distributed equally among living second-generation descendants. Equal distribution. Between me and Jade. The lake house was trust-held. If it was ever sold to cover business debts, I was legally entitled to half the proceeds. I read the clause 3 times. Then I called my attorney. This was not revenge. This was homework. I requested a family meeting by text, formal, to my parents and Jade together. I said I had financial information that affected everyone and needed to be discussed. We met on a Saturday morning. My mother made coffee. Jade arrived 15 minutes late. I brought printed copies of the trust document with the relevant clause highlighted. I also brought a 1-page plain language summary I had written myself, so there would be no confusion. I placed everything on the table and waited until everyone was seated. Then I explained it calmly. The trust clause, what it meant, what it required if the assets were ever liquidated. My parents stared at the documents. My father picked up his copy and read the highlighted section twice. He said nothing. My mother asked, "Is this real?" I said, "I drafted the early framework for this trust in 2019 with Grandma's attorney. So yes, it is very real." Jade said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm informing you of something that already exists and affects all of our interests." My father set the document down. He looked older than I had ever seen him. Nobody argued. There was nothing to argue about. For the first time at a family table, the math was on my side. The boutique closed on a Thursday. A corporate client had booked the venue for a 2-day leadership retreat in October. 60 guests. Full catering. The contract value was $22,000. The event that was supposed to turn everything around. Jade's team had underestimated the kitchen capacity. Midway through day 1, the catering setup failed. The refrigeration rental was smaller than contracted. The lead caterer walked off the job at noon. By 2 o'clock, 60 corporate guests stood around an incomplete setup with no food service and no answers. The client invoked the penalty clause. Jade owed a full refund plus damages, just under $30,000. 3 outstanding vendor claims. The florist penalty. Now this. The numbers did not add up in any direction. My parents and Jade sat in the living room that evening. For once, every eye in that room was focused on the problem in front of them, not on me to absorb it. I sat across from them. I was not cold or triumphant. I was sad in the quiet way you feel when something you predicted comes true and you wish it hadn't. The property would need to be sold. Everyone in the room understood that. The lake house went on the market 11 days later. I want to be honest about my thinking. It was not purely emotional. It was not only about reclaiming something symbolic. It was also strategic. The property was undervalued in its current distressed state. My investment team had reviewed it. The renovation Jade had done was structurally sound, beautiful bones, good lighting, excellent flooring in the main hall. With a repositioned model and proper operational structure, the property could generate significant returns. I knew that property deeply. I had spent summers there as a child. I understood its layout, its limitations, and its potential better than any outside buyer. I was the most qualified person available, and I had the capital to close cleanly. I submitted an offer through my investment group's holding company. Cash offer. No financing contingency. 30-day close. I did not tell my family. I wanted the offer evaluated purely on its merits, not on the name behind it, not on family feelings or history, or whose name carried weight at the dinner table. I wanted it to stand entirely on its own. The closing paperwork was finalized on a Wednesday afternoon. The seller's agent, acting on my parents' behalf, had accepted the strongest offer. No contingencies. Fastest close. Clean terms. My parents arrived at the title company at 2:00. I was already seated at the conference table when they walked in. My father stopped in the doorway. The buyer's documentation named my holding company, my investment group, my capital. My mother looked at me for a long time. My father sat down slowly. The title agent, professional and unbothered, continued organizing documents. I signed where I was asked to sign. When the paperwork was complete, my father said, "You bought it." I said, "Yes." He said, "You didn't tell us." I said, "The offer was evaluated on its merits. I wanted it to stand on its own." My mother's eyes were wet, not angry, something more complicated. I did not feel triumphant or vindicated. I felt settled, the way you feel when a long, uncomfortable imbalance finally levels out. I had not stolen anything. I had not manipulated anyone. I had submitted a legal offer in an open market and had been accepted. The difference between my purchase and my sister's gift was one word. Mine was earned. Jade called me that evening. Her voice was tight. She said, "You stole it back." I let her finish. Then I said, "I purchased it legally through an open market transaction. You received it through a legal family decision. The methods are different. The outcomes are similar." She said that was not the same, and I knew it. I told her I understood she was upset, that I was not trying to humiliate her, that I had submitted an offer because the property was a sound investment and I was best positioned to develop it responsibly. She said, "You did this on purpose." I thought about that honestly. Then I said, "Jade, I wanted to build something that works. I also believe it is fair that I own a stake in what I helped create. But I did not destroy your business. It had problems before I ever showed up with a recovery plan. I offered a way forward. It was declined." Quiet on the line. She said, "Mom and Dad are devastated." I said, "I know. I'll talk to them." I called my parents separately. My father was quiet. My mother cried. I told them I was not angry and I had not done this to wound the family. I told them I was finished being invisible. The trust clause activated as part of the asset liquidation process. My attorney had filed the appropriate notice with the trustee 30 days prior. Everything was documented, properly structured, fully above board. After the property sale closed and the business debts were settled, the renovation overruns, the vendor penalties, the co-signed loan repayment, the remaining portfolio funds were subject to equal distribution between me and Jade. The remaining balance after all debts was $41,000, $20,500 to each of us. My parents sat with Marcus to review the final numbers. Marcus told me later that my father had sat very still for a long time after seeing the breakdown. For the first time in the history of our family's finances, the numbers between me and my sister were equal. It was not a large sum. That was not the point. The point was that the math, when governed by rules rather than preference, naturally corrected itself. The system worked exactly the way my grandmother had intended when she built that clause decades ago. My parents looked shaken, Marcus said. Not angry. Shaken in the way that people look when an assumption they have carried for years turns out to be less stable than they believed. My father called me 2 weeks after the closing and asked if I would come over. Not for a family meeting, just to talk. I went on a Sunday morning. My mother made coffee. We sat at the same kitchen table where so many important conversations had taken place, most of them going in Jade's favor. My father said, "We underestimated you." He said it quietly, not as performance. He was stating a fact he had arrived at slowly, the way honest people do. My mother said they had always believed I would land on my feet, that my stability seemed permanent, self-sustaining. I listened without rushing to reassure them. I let the words sit in the room the way important things deserve to sit. Then I said, "I needed you to see me, not just depend on me. There is a difference." My father nodded slowly. I told them I was not ending anything. I was changing the terms. Going forward, I would be honest about what I needed and what I was not willing to absorb, and I expected the same in return. We didn't hug dramatically. We finished our coffee, but the old dynamic did not survive that morning. My sister reached out in late January. A simple text one evening. She had been thinking, she had questions, was I open to talking? I said yes. We met at the same coffee shop where she had signed the consulting agreement. I wondered if she had chosen it on purpose. She looked quieter than I had seen her look in years. Not defeated, more grounded, like the surface noise had finally settled. She asked me how I had built stability without a safety net. Not resentfully, in the genuine way of someone who has just discovered that the floor is not guaranteed and wants to understand how others stand without it. I told her what I actually believed. That safety nets are not bad, that needing support is not a character flaw, but that the most reliable foundation is one you build yourself, because you are the only person who will never leave or redirect it. I also told her I had made my own mistakes, that I had let myself be used because I confused being needed with being valued. That took years to untangle. She asked real questions, the kind that require thinking before you answer. We talked for almost 2 hours. The entitlement was gone. In its place was something more honest. I respected that. I renovated the lake house over 7 months. I kept what Jade had done well. The structural bones, the dock lighting, the wide plank flooring in the main hall. I redesigned what didn't work. The event space concept was not entirely wrong. It was simply operated with the wrong model. I repositioned it as a leadership retreat venue tied directly to my consulting practice. Small groups, 12 to 18 senior professionals working through strategic planning and organizational transitions. The pricing reflected the value. $3,800 per person per retreat. Full program, meals included, 2 nights on site. I brought in a retreat coordinator, an experienced venue manager, and a chef who specialized in group dining. 3 staff, clear roles, documented processes. The first official retreat ran in March. 14 participants, sold out in 11 days. The second, 6 weeks later, had a waiting list within 48 hours of opening registration. By the end of the first operating year, the venue had hosted 9 retreats. Revenue, $284,000. Operating costs, $91,000. Net profit, just under $200,000. The lake house had become what it always had the potential to be. Not because of luck, not because of a gift, because someone who understood what they were doing had taken the time to build it right. In February of the following year, a business publication reached out. They were writing a feature on alternative revenue models in the professional development industry, specifically the rise of intimate leadership retreat formats as an alternative to large-scale conferences. A contact at a firm I had worked with gave them my name. The journalist spent 90 minutes with me on a video call. She asked about the retreat model, the pricing strategy, the participant selection process, and the philosophy behind combining venue ownership with consulting services. She asked if there was a personal story behind the property. I told her. A family asset changed hands, the business built on it failed, and I acquired it through an open market transaction and rebuilt it under a structured operating model. She found that interesting. She did not press further, and I offered nothing more. When the article ran, it focused on the execution, the model, the numbers, the methodology. My name appeared throughout. The retreat center was cited as an example of smart reinvestment following distressed asset acquisition. My parents read it. My father sent a short text, "Well done." My sister sent a longer message saying she was proud of me, then corrected herself, then said she was simply glad things had worked out and hoped we could keep talking. I wrote back, "Me too." The first holiday gathering I hosted at the retreat center was Thanksgiving. My mother had asked if we could come to the lake house, using the old name without thinking. I said yes. 12 of us came. Parents, cousins, an aunt from my mother's side. Jade brought a friend. After dinner, when plates were cleared and the younger cousins had wandered to the dock, my parents and I stood outside together. The lake was dark and still. The lights I had strung along the railing reflected in the water below us. My mother said quietly, "You were never second best." She said it softly, almost to herself, looking out at the water, not as a prepared speech. The way people say things when they have been carrying them for a long time and finally set them down. My father said nothing, but he placed his hand briefly on my shoulder. My sister stood a few feet away. She did not argue, did not try to reframe. She simply stood with the rest of us. There was no dramatic resolution, no tearful group apology. No one got everything they wanted from that evening, but something between us was finally honest. In that particular place, with those particular people, honesty was enough. I want to be clear about what I actually took back. Not a property, not a dollar amount, not a portfolio balance. What I took back was leverage. For most of my adult life, I operated inside a system that rewarded my competence by expecting more of it for free. I fixed things quietly. I absorbed costs without naming them. I structured strategies that benefited everyone and accepted the outcome without complaint. I believed that being reliable meant needing nothing. That needing nothing made me admirable. What it actually made me was exploitable. The shift began the night my parents gave away my future and told me I would be fine. Not because I wouldn't be fine, I would and I did, but because the assumption that I didn't need protecting revealed exactly how I had been positioned in my own family. What I took back was the decision to be seen, to set terms, to sign agreements, to walk away from problems I did not create, to submit offers without apologizing, to hold the trust clause I helped build and let it function as designed. None of those moves were cruel. None were petty. They were simply mine. I stopped being the person who cleaned up quietly. I became the person who decided. For some of us, that is everything. They gave my future to my sister because they thought I didn't need it. They were right. I didn't need their version of it. What I needed was to stop confusing not needing things with not deserving them. Those are two completely different statements, and I had been treating them as the same for 31 years. I deserved the portfolio I helped build. I deserved to be seen by the people I had shown up for every single time. I deserved to be protected the same way I had always protected everyone else. I didn't get those things at first. But I learned something worth more than any lake house or investment fund. When the people you love cannot see you clearly, you must choose. Shrink yourself until they are comfortable, or build something so real and so undeniable that the truth eventually becomes impossible to ignore. I chose to build, and when the dust settled, when the business failed, when the loans came due, when the trust clause activated and the closing papers were signed, what remained was not bitterness. What remained was balance. I did not destroy my family. I changed the terms. I stopped being invisible. I stopped being free. I stopped absorbing costs that were never mine to carry. In doing so, I did not just take back property or money. I took back myself. That is what no one can give away for you, and no one can take once you truly have it.